All right, so we all talk about depth of knowledge. We use it to make sure our tests are rigorous, right? But what if the very tool we're all using to measure rigor is fundamentally broken? Today, we are digging into a massive flaw in how we assess student thinking. And believe me, the evidence is pretty damning. Let's just kick things off with a quote that should stop any educator dead in their tracks. Back in 2023, Hoffman and Wine flat out said that the way we use DOK is widely misapplied. And get this part, it's a problem that's commonly understood but rarely publicly acknowledged. Wow. So we're not talking about a few small mistakes here. We're talking about a systemic problem that could be undermining our most important assessments. Welcome back to Simplified Teaching, where we demystify pedagogy. Today, we're diving deep into the peer-reviewed evidence on Webb's depth of knowledge. Let's break down what's really going on. So, here's the game plan. First, we're going to deconstruct the theory and figure out exactly where it all went wrong. Then, we'll look at a real-world case study to see the damage firsthand. We'll get to the heart of the core conflict, see how these different pieces of research actually connect, and then, of course, we'll wrap up with the big takeaways and some concrete action points for you.
All right, section 1. Let's start at the source. Because to really understand where we are now, we have to go back and look at what depth of knowledge was actually supposed to be and how we managed to get so far off track.
This slide right here gets to the absolute heart of the problem. Hoffman and Wine argue that most of us are using this watered-down, misinterpreted version of DOK, which they call IDOK. See, we've gotten obsessed with the features of the task. How many steps does it have? Is it a short answer or an essay? But that's not the point. The real question, the one Webb wanted us to ask, is about the student's thinking. Is the student just recalling a memorized fact, or are they genuinely grappling with a new problem? That is a seismic shift in perspective, and honestly, it changes everything. Okay, so the theory's shaky. That's one thing. But what does this breakdown actually look like when the rubber meets the road in our schools and classrooms? Let's check out the real-world consequences. And that brings us to section 2, where we move from abstract theory to hard reality. A 2025 audit from a medical college, a place where the stakes of assessment literally could not be higher, gives us a pretty shocking glimpse into the practical fallout from this whole dilemma. Just look at that number for a second. 561. Out of 2,400 multiple-choice questions they reviewed, researchers found 561 distinct flaws. I mean, let that sink in. That is nearly 1 in every 4 questions that was broken in some significant way. This isn't just a few bad apples, you guys. This is a systemic failure. Now, the really big deal here, the core finding, was something the researchers identified as a new category: alignment flaws. And no, this wasn't about typos or clunky wording. This was about questions that completely, totally missed the mark. They simply weren't measuring what they were supposed to be measuring. But here's the powerful part. The study doesn't just point out the problem, it gives us a clear, replicable audit process to find these errors, a process that any of us can use. This chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? The number one problem, the biggest slice of the pie, wasn't that the questions were too hard or that they gave away the answer. No, the biggest single issue was alignment. The assessments were asking the wrong questions, totally disconnected from what the students were actually supposed to be learning. And all of this brings us right here, to the absolute core of the problem. It really all boils down to one critical distinction, that somewhere along the way, it seems like we've all completely forgotten. The key concept we need to grab onto is something called automaticity. Okay, think about when you first learned to drive a car. Every single action, checking the mirror, turning the wheel, pressing the pedal, it was all super deliberate and clunky, right? Now, you probably just do it without even thinking. That is automaticity. It's when a complex skill becomes second nature, and it's the entire goal of learning. This idea is central to everything that's gone wrong with DOK. And this, right here, this brilliantly illustrates that core conflict. On one side, you have task complexity. That's the what. It's about the task itself. On the other, you have cognitive complexity. That's the how. It's all about the student's interaction with that task. Here's a perfect example. Think about writing the word cat. For you and me, that's an automatic DOK1 recall task. We don't even think about it. But for a 5-year-old who's just learning to write, man, that is an incredibly deliberate, high-complexity task. It involves letter formation, phonics, fine motor control, the whole shebang. The task, writing cat, is identical, but the cognitive complexity is worlds apart. We've been busy measuring the task when we should have been trying to understand the thinking. Okay, so we've got a theoretical problem from Hoffman and Wine, and we've got a practical audit from Kahn's team. So how did these two actually fit together? Are they telling the same story, or do they contradict each other? This slide shows how these two studies actually fit together like puzzle pieces. It's perfect. Think of it this way. Hoffman and Wine are trying to fix the ruler, our broken definition of DOK. Meanwhile, Kahn's team is trying to fix the factory, the broken process we use to build our tests. One is focused on the theory, the other is all about the practice. They're not in conflict, they're diagnosing two parts of the same huge problem. And what they both prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that our current system just isn't rigorous enough. Hoffman's theory gives us a much sharper lens to use in Kahn's audit. It lets us ask not just is it aligned, but what is the actual cognitive path a student will take to get to this answer. And Kahn's audit shows us in painstaking detail exactly why we need Hoffman's better, smarter theory out here in the real world. All right, we've waded through the theory, we've looked at the data, so what's the bottom line here? Let's distill all of this down to the absolute essentials. Here are the three big things you need to walk away with. First, and this is the big one, cognitive complexity lives in the student's head, not on the page. We have to stop rating the question and start thinking about the student's journey to the answer. Second, real alignment isn't about just matching keywords from the standard to the question. It's about making sure the thinking process the question demands is the same thinking process you taught. And third, we have got to stop fixing broken tests after students have already taken them. Real quality control, real validity has to happen before a single student ever sees that question. Okay, so understanding the problem is crucial, but putting that understanding into practice is what really counts. So let's turn these big ideas into 3 specific actions you can take this week. Here are your 3 steps. Number 1, conduct a cognitive path audit. Take one of your assessment questions and literally map out 2 routes to the answer. The expert route, which is probably automatic for you, and the novice route, the one a student would take. The gap between those 2 paths? That's the true complexity. 2, stress test your alignment chain. Look at a question and ask, does every single part of it, the prompt, the data, the options, form an unbroken logical chain that connects directly back to the learning objective? And 3, and this is simple, add alignment flaw as a category to your review checklist. Start actively hunting for it, just like the Kahn study did. Make it an official part of your quality control process. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. If our very measures of rigor are this flawed, and if our questions are so often misaligned, what is it that we're actually measuring? To ensure you keep receiving these research-driven pedagogy breakdowns, simply like this video and hit subscribe to Simplified Teaching right now. The next analysis drops next week. You won't want to miss it. P.S. Want to support our work? Relevant resources and affiliate links are in the description below. See you next week.